Hello and welcome to The Print. Today we have with us all the way from Israel, Tal Heinrich, who is a spokesperson for the Israel Prime Minister's office. Ma'am, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Pia.
So it's been 1 month since Hamas's attack on Israel and much has happened. But first, I'd like you perhaps to answer a question on reports we are seeing now that apparently Israel is open to importing a lot of Indian labor, about 50,000 to 100,000 Indian workers to replace jobs that were once taken by Palestinians who have now seen their work permits cancelled. Can you confirm if this is true?
I cannot confirm this report, unfortunately. I'll have to check and get back to you on that.
But would Israel be open to something like this?
Well, Israel is always very appreciative of the relationship with India, also on the economic front. So I will have to get to the specifics of these reports and check them and then get back to you. I cannot elaborate on that right now.
No problem. I would also like to ask about, talks between India and currently the Israel embassy in Delhi about designating Hamas as a terror organization. Recently, the Israel ambassador to India, Naur Gilon, said that he had approached the Indian government regarding this issue. Have there been any high-level talks between India and Israel on designating Hamas as a terror group?
I can say that generally, we want to see and we hope to see every nation in the civilized world defining Hamas as a terrorist organization. What else would you call an organization that butchers, rapes, mutilates, kidnaps civilians into the Gaza Strip and killed so many Israelis? How else would you call them? People who are boasting about their so-called achievements when they murdered us on October 7th. Not only that they, call their family and relatives to boast about it, they also live streamed some of these atrocities. They sent them on WhatsApp to the relatives of these people whom they butchered. How else would you call them? And they're inflicting pain and suffering not only on Israelis, but also on Palestinians, as you know, in the Gaza Strip. How else would you call them other than terrorists? And it should be a no-brainer. Hamas are terrorists and they're worse than ISIS. We've said it. If ISIS are terrorists, then Hamas are terrorists indeed. Terrorists on steroids, you can call them. They have a state sponsor behind them called Iran. And their atrocities, I would say some, even more brutal than ISIS and the magnitude that we've seen, because we're talking about children here and babies and elderly that they butchered, burned, kidnapped to Gaza.
Has the Israel Prime Minister's office been in touch with the Indian Prime Minister's office on this?
I can tell you that we have been in touch with many nations, and we have, as you know, a very special relationship with India and Prime Minister Modi. And we are sure that India will do the right thing, because we are sure that the Indian people watching us right now know how to tell good from evil, and they understand what we're dealing with. That is pure evil. Hamas are terrorists.
You mentioned that some Hamas terrorists on October 7th, when the attack happened, live streamed and shared a lot of the atrocities they carried out. In fact, the Israel embassy in India invited a group of journalists just last week to see some of this video footage that they had captured from dashboard cameras and other sources of video footage. Is the Israel government planning on publicizing this video footage, taking it to the world stage?
It is a very good question, and we have been addressed this question time and again, and there are a few considerations here. We have arranged for different screenings for journalists, for world leaders, for diplomats, and I'm hearing that one of our top actresses in Hollywood is also organizing a screening of this kind for, Hollywood executives and actors and so on. We want the world to see the atrocities, but getting it public and out there through the press is something that has to go through the families of the people who were butchered and raped in these videos. And for and and I'm sure you can understand why it's a very difficult question. It's a very grave issue with many, many considerations. So right now we are showing the atrocities in different channels, different screenings, but some of these footage, by the way, it's also available online if people search for it, but not everything that we have put forward, we have decided to put out publicly because we respect these families and their requests.
Should you conceal their identities and then present this video footage to the world stage, wouldn't that help your cause in designating Hamas as a terror organization?
I'm sure that by now, after all the testimonies that came out and so many journalists and world leaders that have come here and have seen firsthand in their own eyes and talked to families of people who were abducted into Gaza, heard from families and children who lost their parents and parents who lost their children. There's no question here. Everyone is well aware of the brutality and the scope of what had happened here on October 7th. Everyone knows what Hamas's true colors are. They can't disguise it. It's out there. It's public. Everyone in the civilized world knows what Israel stands for and why we are operating in Gaza right now, why we launched this counteroffensive right now. We said that the goal is to eliminate Hamas because we can no longer live next to a monstrous terror base.
The Israeli government has been fielding a lot of questions on the proportionate nature of its response, its military response. But my question to you is, does Israel have a deadline by which it wants to remove Hamas from Gaza?
So there's no deadline here. There is no stopwatch on the military activity in Gaza. We said that once the goal is completed, there will be a ceasefire again, just like there was a ceasefire on October 6th, the one that Hamas broke when they butchered us on October 7th. So we said that the goal is to eliminate the Hamas regime as the governance body, as a terrible, murderous military wing. Hamas can simply be no longer. And we want to see the hostages back safe in Israel. So we have these two goals that are dictating our strategy as we operate in Gaza. And of course, that as we do this, we want to minimize the civilian suffering and civilian casualties in Gaza. Unlike Hamas, they say in interviews that they want to sacrifice the Palestinian civilian population for their bigger goal of obliterating the Jewish state and killing the Jewish people. And we're not going to let that happen.
You brought up hostages. Can you provide us any information on whether the Israeli government has located where these hostages are and whether it has any concerns that the repeated Israeli strikes we're seeing in Gaza, airstrikes, may in fact hurt some of the hostages?
You see, we're acting in a very surgical way in the Gaza Strip, by part also because of this reason that you have brought up. I cannot say anything about information that we may or may not have regarding the whereabouts of these hostages, but I can assure you that Israel is working in different avenues to bring to their release, if it's by exerting military pressure or exerting diplomatic pressure in different channels. And we call on Hamas to immediately and unconditionally release them.
I want to move a little bit more towards the regional fallout of this conflict, or rather the geopolitics at play as well. We've seen before the attack on Israel that it was in talks with Saudi Arabia for normalization of ties. Those talks have now been put on ice. Do you see this conflict having a ripple effect on planned infrastructure projects in the region, such as the IMEC or the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, which Israel is not officially a part of, but is definitely seen to be a key player in this?
We want to see this project coming to fruition, the rails and ports project that you're talking about that will connect India with Europe through Israel and Saudi Arabia and bring prosperity to the Middle East. This is what we want to see. And we know that the people of India want to see it and that the good people of conscience across the Middle East region want to see it. But as you said, it is not coincidental that Hamas attacked us and massacred us as they did right when we were on the brink of a major diplomatic breakthrough that would have brought an historic peace deal to the region. We hope to see it, one day. But first, the goal of eliminating Hamas must be completed, because peace and prosperity and stability in the region, this is the worst enemy of these bloodthirsty terrorists.
Now let's move a little bit into the domestic politics that we're seeing in Israel and how this has affected Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition government. Recently, we saw an Israeli minister from Mr. Ben-Gvir's party, in fact, propose dropping a nuclear bomb in Gaza. He was later suspended, and Prime Minister Netanyahu issued a statement criticizing those remarks. How has the Prime Minister, navigated such frictions within his own coalition government, especially when it comes from far-right politicians?
It's very important that you mentioned that this person has been suspended in any way. He doesn't represent the government that we have in place. He doesn't represent the public sentiment here in Israel. I can assure you that. This is not what we want. This is not what we're after. We want to eliminate the Hamas terror regime, and that's it, full stop, and bring back the hostages. So you see, but we are not talking and dealing with political issues right now, because these are the things that are on top of minds of Israelis: eliminating Hamas, defeating them, and bringing back the hostages. When Hamas attacked us on October 7th, they didn't care who we voted for. In fact, some of these communities that were close to the Gaza Strip, they're known for their, left-wing positions, the peace camp, so to say. Hamas terrorists didn't care who Israelis voted for, and this is why we are very united in this right now, and it is reflected, by the way, in our unity government. We're not talking politics; we are talking security, safety, accountability. That's the talk of the day in Israel. It's been like that for a month.
Then I must ask you, there are some polls and surveys that have come out. In fact, last month, the one from Jerusalem Post about Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's declining popularity. In fact, a recent poll said 70 to 80% of Israelis want him to resign after the war. Any reaction on these polls?
We're not looking at polls or politics right now. I can tell you that the Prime Minister has been asked this question in one of his press conferences for the foreign media, by the way, and he said that he will resign Hamas to the dustbin of history. That was his answer.
Well, lastly, I wanted to ask you about how multilateral forums like the United Nations have viewed this conflict. We've seen, statements from the UN Secretary General about how this attack didn't happen in a vacuum. That was later condemned by Israel's representative to the UN, who in fact called for the UN chief's resignation. Does Prime Minister Netanyahu share this view? Does he also want the UN chief to resign?
Well, our ambassador to the United Nations, Mr. Gilad Erdan, he represents the country. So when he speaks, he does speak for the country. You see, it is outrageous that we are a month after the October 7th massacre and the UN Security Council didn't even condemn Hamas, or we're still waiting to see it. Unfortunately, Israelis, over the years, we have very low expectations from this institution because there's a built-in bias in it against us.
Thank you so much, Tal, for joining us on this program today. We'll be monitoring this situation very closely, as I'm sure you are as well. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you.